Chelsea. This is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I am wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today I'm bringing you my wrap-up for the Tome Infinity and Beyond readathon. This was a readathon that took place over the course of 2 weeks last month in September. It was hosted by the channel that was previously called Brushing Bookends, but is now called Tome Infinity, with a bunch of co-hosts. I will link the host channel down below so you can follow and learn if there are going to be future rounds of this readathon, which I think there might be in the works. But this was a sci-fi themed readathon with a map that you follow from like challenge to challenge. The premise was that Earth is going to be uninhabitable and we all have to flee Earth on one of 4 spaceships, each of which have a reading challenge associated, and then you go from planet to planet along the lines that the map designates for your potential paths. And each location in the solar system that you might visit has a challenge of its own. Now, I had 5 books on my TBR for this readathon, and I only managed to read 3 of them. I'm not displeased with that. I didn't meet the ultimate goal, which is to land on 3 planets before deciding which one is going to be your home. I am going to count the asteroid belt. I'm going to say that I landed on an asteroid, took a look around, decided I wasn't going to build a colony there, and left. But even counting the asteroid belt like that, I only landed on 2 planets. But I'm not actually super displeased with the amount of reading that I got done. The first book that I read was Borne by VanderMeer. This fit the challenge of my spaceship that I was leaving on Ship D, which was to read a new-to-you author. I had not read VanderMeer's previous trilogy, the Southern Reach trilogy, Annihilation, and sequels. Frankly, I don't have any interest in reading those books, but all of the reviews I was seeing for this one and how weird it was and how interesting really caught my attention. I had this book out from the library and I had started reading it several months ago during, I think, the BookTube SFF Award read-alongs, and I was not getting on with it at the time, and I set it down for several months, and so I picked it back up for this. I didn't bother going back to reread the beginning chapters that I had already read. I just kept going. But still, I think this was just a case of the wrong book at the wrong time. I'm not going to argue that this is a bad book. I don't think it is. It's probably one of the most original sci-fi stories, premises I've read in a long time. But I think there are a lot of types of stories that I am just not in a mindset or emotional space to be able to handle right now. And anything like desolately post-apocalyptic and dystopian is something that I am not able to enjoy at this time and place in my reading life. So basically, the world that this book takes place in is like the most bizarre biotech post-apocalypse you could absolutely even try to imagine. It sort of feels like a world that's just lost all rational order, along with, you know, all social structure. We're in this ruined city where basically what terrorizes the city is the remains of what came out of the company building, which was a biotech company. And they created a thing called Mord, which is this giant flying bear. But now the company has fallen, no one is in control of the city. As far as we can tell, all social order has collapsed in this world, not just in this one city. But this city is then terrorized by Mord, who is presumably being served by whatever people are remaining huddling in the remnants of the company building, pumping out weird biotech. Now, I had actually kind of hoped that the bizarreness of this premise would actually be a selling point for me, since I tend to enjoy, like, really weird, bonkers, imaginative world building. But the effect that this particular brand of weirdness had for me was sort of feeling of just utter desolation and hopelessness. There's sort of this sense that, like, this has to be rock bottom. There cannot possibly be any existence that is crappier than this bizarre thing with giant bears flying in the sky and, like, killer mutant children being sent to murder people. And then over the course of the book, several times it turns out that yes, things can in fact get worse. And this just wasn't something I want to contemplate right now. So in terms of the actual story of this book, we follow a woman named Rachel who's a scavenger, and she finds this like blob of sentient biotech. She calls it Borne, and she takes it in and raises it as if it's sort of her child. Rachel lives with a man named Wick, who is both her working partner and her lover. And as far as people go in this ruined city, they are relatively well off. They have territory that is theirs that they are able to protect from intruders. Wick formerly worked at the company, and he keeps the two of them going with biotech while Rachel goes out and scavenges. But their relationship isn't a very communicative one. They keep a lot of secrets from each other. They don't talk about a lot of stuff. For a lot of the book, it sort of feels like, is this the best there is? Like, you found someone who's not going to like murder you and eat you for meat that you can cohabitate with. Yay! But basically Wick really opposes Rachel having taken Borne in to their home and letting him live there. Wick is deeply suspicious of what Borne might turn out to be, and that causes even more stress and tension in their relationship. There are a lot of really interesting things that this book does. Basically we're following Borne growing up and sort of asking questions that, you know, Rachel maybe doesn't know how to answer about, like, what does it mean that he is a person who is not human, who has maybe been created for potentially nefarious purposes. We get some flashbacks of Rachel's memories of her parents raising her amidst this crumbling world and trying to preserve some sense of normalcy for her. And it is that sort of quiet domestic story that I might have been really, really invested in if the whole world building premise of the thing hadn't made me so despondently gloomy every time I picked up the book. So that was my trouble getting through this book, is it just made me feel like crap every time I tried to re-immerse myself in this world, and I didn't want to go there. So I kept not wanting to like pick it back up, not wanting to keep reading for long periods of time. So it took me a really long time to get through this book. I will say the ending does have a bit more of a hopeful feel, both for the world as a whole and for Rachel and Wick's relationship. But man, it's just like a glimmer at the end there, and like most of the story is like everything is bananas crap. Also, like the ending, as in the resolution to the story ending, is totally bonkers, and I have no idea. Like, there's some level on which I don't really know what happened there, and I am glad that I didn't DNF this, that I did keep on reading to, you know, get to some of those revelations and twists toward the end. So I think this book definitely has literary merit. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but in my sort of emotional state, I couldn't really handle it, and I gave it only 2 stars, which I feel bad about because it is not a bad book. I could have maybe enjoyed the speculation of this book if I were not living in a world myself where, you know, a lot of the news was putting me really on edge. But this is just not the sort of world I want to be reading about right now at all. So I wasted a lot of the time of the readathon trying to slog through Borne. I did eventually finish it in time to pick up my second book, which was just much more of a fun, escapist entertainment. And this was Arabella and the Battle of Venus by David D. Levine. This was for the challenge that was assigned to the asteroid belt, which is to read a space adventure. I think that's what it was. This is an alt-historical Regency Napoleonic Wars in space thing. It's the second book in the Adventures of Arabella Ashby. The first book was Arabella of Mars. So in this book, Arabella is on Mars when she receives news that her fiancé, Captain Singh, has been taken captive by Napoleon and is being held a prisoner on Venus. Some further news regarding the situation convinces her that it is absolutely necessary that her husband escape, and so she commissions a privateer's ship to take her to Venus to try and win her fiancé's freedom. So of course we've got a whole new airship's crew of characters to meet here. Arabella is also forced to be accompanied by a very proper older lady as a chaperone. But when they get to Venus, of course, nothing goes as planned. I found this book, just like the first one in the series, to be just a fun page-turner, and I enjoyed that so much coming off of Borne there. I liked that we get to see more of the world building of this world than we did in the first book. We've sort of expanded our view to include Venus, to include more about what the French are up to in space. I think both of these first two books have sort of self-consciously tiptoed around ideas about imperialism. Both Mars and Venus in this world have, you know, sentient alien civilizations, and I'm not sure that either of these books have quite gone far enough in terms of exploring that. Mostly we're just supposed to feel good that Arabella is a character who respects those indigenous civilizations, even when those around her, both the French and the English, often don't. But I gave this 4 stars, just like the first book. It tickled me immensely that there is a production of Twelfth Night that is central to the plot in this book, which is, of course, sort of a reference to the first book having been a story where Arabella was cross-dressing, pretending to be a boy. Twelfth Night is probably the reason that I enjoy that trope so much, early exposure to Twelfth Night at a young age. So throwing in a production of Twelfth Night in this book just made me very happy. And then the last book I read was Barsk, the Elephant's Graveyard by Lawrence M. Schoen. This was for the challenge for Saturn to read a book with circles on the cover. So there's a moon here with some craters on it. So those are my circles. This is a science fantasy book set in a world, the premise of which I cannot help but describe as Zootopia in space. Basically, the people of this far future world are all anthropomorphic animals, and they have like an interplanetary space government so that all of the different animals can, you know, live together in harmony. But despite the whole anthropomorphic animal thing, this is actually a book with some really dark, heavy themes and subject matter. The title, Barsk, is the name of the planet that most of the action of this book takes place on. And Barsk is the home of the Fant, which are the 2 species of elephants. Now, in this world, there is a lot of really irrational prejudice and xenophobia towards the Fant, but they have a treaty that has granted them Barsk as a home world where they can live free from the intervention of these other species. Now, right at the beginning of this book, so it's not a spoiler, we learn that some officials from off-planet have arrived on Barsk in violation of the treaty and are basically abducting elderly, dying Fant. One of the things about the Fant is that they know when they're going to die, when they're supposed to die, and they have this vision of where they are supposed to journey off to. Barsk is a watery world with islands, and basically the elderly dying, cleanse themselves of their worldly lives and head off on a boat to the destination of their death. And so these government officials from off-planet are basically abducting these dying elderly elephants because there is information that they want from the Fant, but they don't want to be detected at it. They don't want anyone to know that they're abducting people, so they take the people who are presumed to already be dead. And it's obviously just this incredibly obscene violation of the rights of these dying Fant. This story is told from actually a lot of point of view character perspectives, but there are a couple of main characters, primarily Jorl, who is a Fant historian who has a history of having been one of the few Fant who have ever left Barsk and come back. Sometime after the death, possibly by suicide, of his best friend Arlo, Joel discovered that he is something called a speaker in this world, and a speaker is someone who can communicate with the dead by summoning particles of their personality that are left in the world, in people's memories, and in the universe, the cosmos, called Nefshans. And this is all pure, like, fantasy magic system stuff, which there is quite a decent amount of in this book. And so basically it is Jorel who figures out that some of the presumably recently dead cannot be summoned, and therefore something has gone horrifically wrong with the Fant's ability to die, and so he is the one who sets off trying to figure out what's going on. The other character that I would say is a main character here is Arlo's young son, a boy named Pislo. Now, Pislo has a lot of genetic conditions that are a result, I think, of somehow being born out of wedlock, and in Fant society, somehow this causes genetic disorders, and I am not certain about how that actually works. That was one of the things in this book that I really wanted some more detail on. But basically, Pislo is socially shunned. The people of Barsk do not acknowledge him as a person. They don't acknowledge his existence at all, basically. And he wouldn't have been expected to survive past infanthood with his various medical abnormalities. He is albino, and he also can't feel pain when he's injured, and possibly some other things as well. But his parents acknowledged him and were raising him, and then after Arlo's death, Jorel has also stepped in as sort of a father figure to Pislo. And Pislo, it turns out, has some sort of prophetic abilities. Basically, he can hear the planet Barsk and, you know, the earth, the sea, the plants, the air all talking to him and telling him things, even if he doesn't have a context to understand what those things mean. And he also understands that the moons of Barsk are also capable of telling him things. Barsk has, I think, 7 moons, but they're not often seen because of cloud cover. So there were things I liked about both of these main characters. I liked that Jorel is an academic, a scholar. That's always a perspective that I like in a book. And then I like that Pislo is just someone who experiences the world in a different way from everyone else around him. But I'm not sure that I ever got really invested in the characters in this book and their stories, and I'm not totally sure why that is. Another thing that's going on here with the prophecy through line is the legacy of the matriarch, who is an ancient Fant prophetess whom Jorel has studied extensively. And Jorel increasingly gets the sense throughout the book that he is being maneuvered on this path that he's been set on by the matriarch's prophecies. The sort of increasing realization that a lot of his life has somehow been predetermined for him. And that's a theme that comes up quite a bit in fantasy stories that involve prophecy of some sort. It's one of the reasons I don't really love fantasy stories that involve prophecy, because I find it hard to relate to. And so when that became more and more a part of the story as it went on, it felt sort of like how I feel about timey-wimey stuff. Like, I just get annoyed when that becomes the main focus of a story. But there are a lot of other themes in this book as well that honestly I think I would have better been able to untangle and analyze if I had not been reading this for a readathon. This was the book that I was reading towards the end of the readathon and racing to finish by a deadline. And, like, my bad, this is probably not the book to read that way. There's an exploration of memory, both, like, individual and cultural memory, that comes from Jorel being a historian and as someone who can speak with the dead by means of, you know, invoking these memories of the dead. And there's this threat of genocide that hovers over the whole thing that makes it feel like very dark, like there's a lot at stake. I was a little confused that Peaslow's storyline in this book felt like, you know, it was headed towards something where he was going to be like critically important, and then that just didn't like happen, and so I wasn't quite sure like why he had been prophetically compelled to get himself into this situation that he's in by the end of the book. But I know there is a sequel to this book now that focuses more on Peaslow, so maybe that will end up paying off in the series, even if it doesn't necessarily pay off in this book. So overall, I gave this book 3 stars. It is real different. I think that's sort of the theme for this readathon for me, with Borne being sort of bizarro, and I don't like it, to this being more bizarro in a really intriguing way that I maybe didn't necessarily puzzle through as much as I could have. And then the Arabella series also has a sort of very unique premise, even if it's more accessible, you know, escapist fiction. So that was what I read for the Tome Infinity and Beyond readathon. I ended up on Saturn. That is my new homeworld. Here are the 2 books that I read that I own, plus the one that I returned to the library. Let me know if you participated in this readathon. Let me know what planet you ended up on if you did. Also, feel free to chat with me in the comments about these 3 books if you've got anything to say. Anyhow, I hope you're having a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.